All right, we are going to be looking at human rights violations from 1914 to 1945, specifically referencing the Holocaust. So let's get into what the Holocaust is. So the Holocaust is something that represents the specific, systematic, state-sponsored persecution and murder of Jews by the Nazis. So the Holocaust lasts roughly from the 1930s to 1945. When we get into our timeline, you'll see that it wasn't just like immediately putting them into camps. There was a lot more that led up to and was a part of the Holocaust. But the idea about it being something that eventually will get to a genocide is the idea of it being systematic, which means that they had a plan, they had a system, there was a process that they were following. A genocide is the deliberate killing of a large group of people, specifically those of a particular ethnic group or nation. When you separate this word, you see side means killing, and genocide goes into a specific ethnicity. Okay? So when we are looking at the idea of a deliberate killing of a specific group of people, the target of this group of people would be better off out of the world completely, then it's a genocide. Okay, so the Holocaust is an example of a genocide, but there are many other genocides outside of the Holocaust. Anti-Semitism. So again, when we see that word anti, hopefully we think about the idea of basically no, they're against it. It is prejudice against, hatred of, or discrimination against Jews. So when we see anti-Semitism or Semite, we need to associate that with Jews. So if you are practice anti-Semitism or an anti-Semite, or you are anti-Semitic, you are somebody who hates Jewish people simply because they are Jewish people. Not a specific group of Jewish people, all Jewish people. An atrocity is an extremely wicked or cruel act, typically one involving physical violence or injury. This word typically goes alongside of genocide, and very often on the regions they will use this word in a text or in a question to get you thinking towards genocide. And then we've talked about forced famine with Joseph Stalin, but just to make sure that we have a good understanding of it, it is a man-made widespread scarcity of food. So let's take a look at this poem, and if you've got any specific questions or issues, we can go over it. Sorry, guys. So this poem is pretty common as part of the regions. They threw it in a lot, but it's also just common in general. So if you look at the text, it is a poem by a man named Martin Niemöller. He was a prominent Protestant pastor. So he was not Jewish. He was Protestant. So he was Christian of some type. And he was an outspoken public foe of Adolf Hitler. When you see that word foe, you want to think about an enemy. This is his op. All right, and spent the last 7 years of Nazi rule in a concentration camp. So this proves to you also that the only people that there were not just Jewish people in concentration camps. Anyone who spoke out against Hitler could find themselves in a camp. First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. So what I want you to do is I want you to think about this poem, look at the context, and answer questions 1, 2, and 3. All right, so let's start taking a look at what the timeline of the Holocaust is. Remember, the Holocaust is not going to just be once they get into camp. So this is showing you actually everything that led up to them going into concentration camps. So it starts in 1933, where Nazis started boycotting Jewish shops and businesses. So there was a nationwide boycott of any Jewish shop, business, doctor's office, it didn't matter. From 1933 to 1935, Jews are banned from owning land, being newspaper editors, from national health insurance, and from serving in the military. They slowly but surely started pushing them out. In 1935, you have the Nuremberg race laws, which you're going to read a little bit more about in a second. And these are proving where Judaism is no longer a religion, but a race. Okay, so this actually makes them sit down and realize that I'm going to classify somebody as being Jewish, even if they have never gone into a synagogue, they do not actively practice. If their parents were Jewish, they are now Jewish. If their grandmother was Jewish, they are now Jewish. In 1937, Jews are banned from many professional occupations, including teaching Germans and from being accountants or dentists. So it started with a boycott. And within 4 years, they are banned from being teachers to Germans, banned from being accountants, banned from being dentists, banned from any other medical fields. And we can start to see it was not immediate. It had to start small. In 1938, Nazis ordered Jews over the age of 15 to apply for identity cards from the police. So they had to go to the police and get a card that said they were Jewish. In 1938, in the same year, Jewish doctors prohibited by law from practicing medicine. By 1938, a couple months later, there is what is considered the first major event of the Holocaust, and this is the Kristallnacht. Now, all these other events that had been happening were leading up to the 9th and the 10th. Fascist governments cannot just jump to Kristallnacht. They cannot just jump to beating up Jews and taking them out, and they cannot just jump to burning synagogues and destroying Jewish businesses. They have to start with just, we are not going to spend money on Jews. Then they can gain support, and then they can go from there. By 1939, yellow stars are required to be worn by Polish Jews, anyone over the age of 10. Now, these yellow stars are the Star of David, and that is the symbol, if you take a look at the armband, that is the symbol of Jews. They were required to wear them because it was then easily identifiable as Jews. By 1941, the Klemno extermination camp becomes operational. Jews taken there are placed in mobile gas vans. So again, this wasn't something before they had full gas extermination camps. They started with vans, and they are driven to the burial place while carbon monoxide from the engine exhaust is fed into the sealed rear compartment, killing them. So the Nuremberg laws, they were laws that deprived Jews and made discrimination against them legal. So this is the key idea. Discrimination against Jews were now legal, which meant it did not matter what the law had been prior. You could have a Jewish person come up to you and say, I would like to apply for this job, and you could look at them and say, I do not hire Jews. You could go through and have this conversation and say to them, no, I will not allow my child to be taught by someone who is Jewish. That is not acceptable. Okay? It took away their rights. They no longer have the right to vote. They cannot fly the German flag because they are no longer German citizens. Had to wear the Star of David, and again, that Star of David, okay, change their name from a German name to a Jewish name. So if they did not already have a German name, or if they didn't already have a Jewish name, they had to add, I believe it was Sarah for girls and Jacob for boys to their names. They had to add it in there. So that way, even if you just hand over a driver's license, even prior to having to wear the Star of David or something else, they could look at this and see Jacob, or they could see Sarah and know that you were a Jew. Treatment of the Jews continued to worsen until they were sent to slave labor camps and death camps. And these laws were designed to treat Jews as second-class citizens. That was their goal. So the camps themselves. So first, we go through the process again. First, it goes with the boycotts before finally getting into a camp. It took a number of years. So they couldn't just jump straight into camps. So first, what our Nazis are going to do is they're going to create ghettos. And these are going to be Jewish neighborhoods. And it's not just going to be like, oh, you can now live here. It is, you are forced to live here. We have walls surrounding it. You can't get in, you can't get out, you can't access anything else unless we tell you. Then you had transit camps. So those were the areas where they would go prior to being sent to the forced labor camps. Then we went to forced labor camps. After forced labor camps, you went to the concentration camps. So please remember, it's not going to just jump straight to there. We had ghettos. From the ghettos, they went into the transit camps. These were usually a little bit nicer. From the transit camps, they went into forced labor. And then from forced labor, finally, the concentration camps or death camps. Now, the most common of them was Auschwitz. All right, this was one of the larger ones. It is the more common, most well-known camp. And they were sent to these camps in railroad cattle cars. When they arrived, most were killed with poison gas and their bodies were burned in ovens. They burned their bodies because they did not want to have evidence of the number of people that they were killing. Some of the stronger prisoners were spared to work at running the camp, but were subjected to starvation and harsh conditions. And it is estimated that about 6 million Jewish people are killed in the Holocaust, and then roughly another 6 million gypsies, Slavs, political prisoners, elderly, mentally disabled people also died in the concentration camps.